Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. Logan Marshall-Green scared the heck out of us in the now cult classic, The Invitation, and Leigh Whannell has been scaring us with so many nightmares over the last decade and a half. Now the two of them have teamed up for Upgrade, a wild sci-fi thriller about a paralyzed man who goes on a revenge mission after getting a computer chip implanted in his body. Let's take a look.
As a quadriplegic, it must be frustrating for you, someone who liked to get things done with their hands.
Here's the thing. 4 guys murdered my wife.
Don't you fucking touch us!
If I could find these men, I'd do it.
What if I told you I could offer you something that would enable you to walk again? I call it STEM, a computer chip that has the potential to change everything. It's a new, better brain. Oh my God.
I am STEM, the system operating your body for you.
Can anybody else hear you?
No, only you. May I point something out? In the drone surveillance footage, Sir Brantner, Marine Corps, address 414 Citrus, Newground. You'll need a plan.
I got this.
This doesn't seem like a well-thought-out plan. I need your permission to operate independently.
Permission granted!
Thank you.
What the fuck?
Stay down, man.
Sam, he's got a knife!
I see that. We have a knife, too. You now have full control again, Gray.
If you are involved in this somehow, then you need to let me know.
Well, I was in the area, Detective.
There's a gun implanted inside his hand.
Stan, what do you think I should do?
Move, Gray.
Whoa, 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 whoa!
Man, you are persistent.
I cannot allow us to be killed. We are going to finish the job we started.
You didn't know that I'm a fucking ninja.
While I am state-of-the-art, I am not a ninja.
Everybody, please welcome Logan Marshall-Green and writer-director Leigh Whannell.
Thanks for having us.
Guys, congratulations on Upgrade. I told you in the
you.
theater, I saw it last week. I loved it. It blew me away. I was not expecting, I hadn't watched that trailer. So I had all of those surprises for the first time on Monday night.
They say that with trailers, you know, the filmmakers are always like, "Oh, you're putting all the great things in the movie," and they're like, "Yeah, that's how we sell the movie by putting the good stuff in there." And they also assure you that there's some sort of trailer amnesia that audiences have, where they walk in and forget the trailer and just go with it. That's what they tell me.
Is that a real conversation that you...
Yeah, I remember on Insidious 3, the film I did before this, the first film I directed, I watched the trailer that they had cut and was like, "You're putting all the best scares in the movie. What are you doing?" And that's what they said. They said, "Don't worry, people forget." They might have just been placating me, but...
it seems exactly like what they were doing. Don't worry, they forget. Get them out of here. Get them out of here.
They were like, the most important thing is to get them in the theater, and I had to agree with them on that.
Yes, that's true. Let's talk about where this came from. There's lots of, I mean, as a person who loves sci-fi and loves horror, I felt a lot of sort of references and homages throughout this film, or just other filmmakers that you were working off of. Can you talk about where this story came from and what you looked at going into making it?
The idea was something just popped into my head one day, this image of a quadriplegic who had a computer chip controlling everything from the neck down. And, you know, as a screenwriter, I'm always trying to think of ideas for movies, and you have images or little acorns of ideas, but usually you file them away in the terrible drawer. Once you've thought about them for half a day, you're like, that's actually a terrible idea for a film. But this image of this a quadriplegic man with a computer chip wouldn't leave my head, and I couldn't stop thinking about it, and sort of started building a movie around that image. Like, okay, why is he a quadriplegic, and what's the computer chip want? And so that's really how the idea came about. In terms of influences, I really wanted to make a film with Blumhouse. I had made the Insidious films with them. and they have a lot of success making low-budget films. I mean, Get Out was nominated for Best Picture, which is basically unheard of for a $5 million horror film. And but they have this really specific model where they only want to make films for this price. They don't waver from that, which other studios are all over the place. They'll make $100 million films and little films.
You make this film for a budget around that range?
Yeah, within their model. What I wanted to do was see if I could make
like the same budget though as like Get Out, without saying what that exactly.
Yeah.
That's fucking crazy. No,
Yeah, we shot it in Australia. We had to.
There's no labor law. No,
Yeah, no, it gives you a little more. You get a little more bang for your buck because there was a bit of a process to get there. It wasn't easy. Like if I wrote a horror movie all set in one room with a family, they'd be like, "Yeah, let's start shooting next week." But with this, it took a long time to get it there because we were trying to make champagne with a beer budget. But my task, the thing that I wanted to achieve was to make a sci-fi movie that was a more expansive world than a haunted house movie for that same price. And I was looking at films like The Terminator, films that I grew up with in the 80s, like RoboCop and The Terminator, these practical effects-driven sci-fi movies. And they're a good model for doing that. If you look at the first Terminator film, it's a really lean and mean film. Yeah. They don't actually give you a lot of.
Well, it was considered like a B exploitation movie upon its release, and then everyone was like, "Oh, this is actually a really good movie." But that's how it was made.
Yeah, it's like Halloween, but with a robot instead of Michael Myers. But the way he dishes out the sci-fi, he's really judicious, James Cameron, in how he gives it to you in these pieces, but somehow it adds up to this picture where the film feels a lot bigger than it is. And, I feel like all the Terminator movies have kind of rolled into one movie now. Like, people will say to me, like, "Oh, yeah, the Terminator, I love that, the liquid guy." And I'm like, that was Terminator 2.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah. And so with that first Terminator, if you separate it from all the other Terminator films, it is low budget. And so I kept looking to that for this and saying, we can do this, we can make something like the Terminator.
So it's like a few establishing shots, wide shots, and then it's all really about finding practical locations that allude to some sort of futuristic society that you're sort of building.
Exactly. You sort of have to, rather than just go for it the way a tentpole movie would, where every single shot is like anybody, if they're having a conversation, they're doing it in front of Asgard or something, or the city of the future. With a movie like this, you do have to go through the script and you pick out scenes where you're like, this is where we're going to go for it. So there's a bit of sleight of hand involved.
And people also forget that in the future, not everything is going to look totally different and crazy. There's still going to be dilapidated warehouses and track houses and stuff like that people are living in.
That's exactly what I used to say to the production team on this. It's always interesting in those future movies where everything looks futury and there's like flying cars and as if they've just raised the entire city and then built a new one that was futuristic. And I was saying word for word what you just said. I was like, look, this is a few years from now, but there'll still be beat up old Toyotas on the road, because the production designer would keep coming to me and saying, well, we need to get these futuristic cars, right? And I was like, no, like some of them can just be crappy cars that we would drive around in now. And as you said, the world changes incrementally, So that's what I was trying to do, is go to that point.
Logan, you're doing an incredible amount of work with your body with this role. You're going from being paralyzed to being able to walk on your own to being controlled by a computer at times. How did you sort of calibrate those different, obviously paralyzed to walking is a pretty big thing. That's probably easier to calibrate, but how did you kind of layer all of those different things and figure out exactly how they should look on camera?
With a lot of dialogue with Leigh, I think it's easy to look at the stillness of the quadriplegic and then, of course, the robotic nature. But, I think Leigh and I realized early on, Gray, the man Gray Trace, actually kind of builds all those rules for us. So if we give him a silhouette that's hunched over and has bad posture, like he's a man who uses his hands would look like, then actually when he's upright, that juxtaposition plays better. So actually it starts right with, I thought, Gray Trace. And Leigh and I worked very diligently on not just finding Gray and Gray as quadriplegic and then as with this technology, but just even within the technology, his relationship to these physical fights and how he's a passenger sometimes, how he's a little cocky the next time, and then he's kind of a teammate, by the end of the movie, and I think that all translates and dictates it physically.
I love when he gets a little cocky and the computer literally says, don't get too cocky.
Yeah.
Like the computer has a sort of sly sense of humor at times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I'd imagine when you're writing that and when you're editing it, you're kind of playing with how much can we actually have this computer do this.
Yeah, for sure. And it was something that actually grew a little bit during filming because I wanted Simon Maiden, who does the voice of STEM in the film, he was always on set. I wanted to make sure that their banter was done live, the way you would interact with another actor. I didn't want to dub it in later or lay the tracks down and have some assistant director standing off camera going, "Stop being so cocky," for Logan to react to. Like I wanted, and so what we figured out was we would put Simon in another room, or whatever set we were on, we would put Simon away, and he would have a microphone and a monitor.
Earpiece?
And then, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Logan would have an earpiece in, which we turned into a prop in the film, like everybody has these
Would you
earpiece
be
phones.
listening? He have an earpiece in as well to hear what he's hearing, or would you just kind of be operating off of?
Simon would have headphones and he could hear. And so whenever they're in the movie, when they're interrupting each other and they have this banter, it's all happening live. I rarely used any additional recording in post. I wanted their interactions. And it was interesting, wasn't it? Because like you could interrupt each other, or they could improv a little bit because it was actually there.
I mean, essentially, to the crew, it just looked like I'm an idiot talking to myself. You don't get that sonic story in the doing of, but of course we all knew what.
Yeah, that
would
was
play
all
in the end.
the pauses were interesting because I could hear what Simon was saying, but yeah, all the camera crew.
Right.
Really, a lot of the movie just looked like
Logan's
Logan
lost
going,
it. He's
like,
fucking
yeah,
over it.
like what? Well, that's stupid. And like they're just shooting it, going, I guess this will work later.
The crew is like that. The entire group of people in the bar
Yeah,
that are
exactly.
watching him at that one point in the movie.
Yeah, exactly. But
Very humbling.
I'm so glad we went to
Is
the
it, you
effort.
say it's humbling?
Just to have a bar of like tattooed, much harder than me, people staring at me and judging everything I'm doing.
But you can tell in the movie, you can see that. I think I'm glad we went to the effort of doing that because their banter was better like that. And I started writing to that when they were doing that. When they were being funny, I was like, oh, this is good the way they're doing this. So I would write some new lines for them. And
It's hard to believe that you were able to craft this movie on the kind of budget you're talking about, not just because of the sci-fi element, but because Logan's character, when he's being operated by the computer, can fight incredibly, and you have sort of Matrix-level fight sequences that are beautifully choreographed and shot in this movie, and I can't imagine how much time you had to actually shoot those. Those usually take a few days at least to sort of to finish.
we didn't have that. We didn't have long, but it was all in the preparation, wasn't it? It was
Yeah.
the planning.
Well, Leigh, I mean, the crew and the stunt team, Leigh got the best. I mean, truly, Chris Anderson and his guys, and I think from the very beginning, everybody knew it's you. You're going to do this, and so we spent a long time in prep, not just working the fights, but neutralizing the body. We had a movement coach that Leigh got, named Darren Inkster. He's a great old Cirque du Soleil guy, and he and I just worked just deep stretching me to get me neutral so that I can put a placeholder here. So throughout these physical days of the month leading up to it, I just threw a placeholder here and then would go home and work the emotional story. And, and unveil it on that day, which I had no idea what was gonna happen. I assume Leigh would be like, okay, let's huddle up, take 5. Logan, no, you stay there. I need everybody else over here. We need to talk about this choice and figure out how to fix it. But so I really didn't know what the collision, the singularity of it all would look like in the end, because we were working in 2 different boxes.
Yeah, none of us did. But I mean, the great thing about Australia is you can really get top shelf crew people because they work on these big American productions that come to town, like The Matrix or Superman. But then those movies aren't always shooting in Australia. So between jobs, these huge crew guys, they have to do little indie Australian movies just to keep busy.
You essentially call studios to find out when they're gonna have a movie shooting in Australia. I'm serious, and be like, okay, we've got a little window here. None of the big comic book movies are gonna be there. We can jump in.
Well, we would have done that, but we found out that Aquaman was going to be shooting, and so they actually which is by James Wan, a friend of mine. I'm like, thanks, James. I would text him and be like, thanks for stealing my gaffers. And so we did have to compete with them. But you do get these amazing people that you maybe wouldn't get on an independent film in the US. You know, you wouldn't get the biggest DP out there to shoot your movie. But
the photography in this film is beautiful. I forgot to mention that. Excuse me. It's really beautiful.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I mean,
all the
crew's
neons and the backlit blues and greens consistently throughout the movie there's a lot of continuity, and it's really gorgeous.
Well, it's all due to the crew. I mean, the Steadicam operator in this film had done Fury Road. The lighting guy, the last film he did before this was Silence, the Martin Scorsese film. So he went from Scorsese to me. I was like, and but what that gives you is,
how are you going to light the moment where we rip the head off?
yeah, exactly. But what that gives you is when you're in a tight spot and you don't have much time, they're just like pros. They just like really step up. And the stunt guy is an Australian legend. He's done. Chris Anderson was his name, and it's hard to do an impression of him without checking on language. Like, can I just swear?
Yeah.
Or is it, yeah, he lost a leg due to a stunt. Like a boat cut his leg off, and he worked on the first Mad Max film, and he's just kind of a legend in Australia. Like he does any big movie that comes to town, Chris works on it, and he was doing this film, and he's just so positive. Like I would say to him, like, things that we shouldn't have been allowed to do for our budget, like I would be like, so can we crash one car into another car and then that car crashes another car? And he'd be like, oh, fuck yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And he's this classic Aussie guy. He would probably need subtitles if you were interviewing him right now because he's like as Aussie as they come. And any question, I'd say, so can we have Logan fight the guy in this style, but his head will be doing something else? And we want him to bend his arm backwards and kind of choke the guy with his own arm. And he'd just be like, fucking A, yeah, we can do that. And then I'm sure when I left the room, he was like, oh, how are we going to do that? But it's just such a positive energy to have. And it makes you feel like you can achieve stuff that you really shouldn't be able to achieve on that budget.
Was this the first film that you've gone back and shot in Australia since you've sort of made it with Saw?
No, I did a film a few years ago called The Mule.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think about between 10 and 20 people saw it. But it was an Australian film. I co-wrote it with a friend of mine. But that would really felt like an Australian film. You know, that was all Australian characters and stuff. So I have been back there, and some of the crew from that worked on this. This was like us using Australia as like trying to get the action Terminator style movie out of that situation.
Logan, you're not necessarily coming from this movie because it was a couple of years ago, but The Invitation, I think, has reached kind of cult classic status at this point. It's one of and I'm wondering kind of what that feels like because when it was first released, I feel like it's kind of one of those things that it was like a slow burn for audiences to really pick it up and find it and start talking about it. Did you notice that as an actor that, you know, months later people were kind of like, oh, The Invitation is this really incredible thriller?
Yeah, I think it had that kind of slow burn effect. Word of mouth was its best friend. You know, for us, we got like a theater at the ArcLight in Hollywood, and we would wait until Monday or Tuesday to find out if they were going to play it again, you know, on that 8 o'clock, you know, every day. And it just kept kind of staying, not reflecting numbers, but reflecting response and that kind of simmering, you know, you could feel that there was a secret, and you know, it was like, have you seen that? You know, them. You know.
That's what it felt. That's what that movie felt like in the best way. It was like a secret that became kind of yours once you saw it, and you would pass it on to.
Yeah, we were just talking about that actually on the way over. Just that, you know, like those. I don't know. For me, and I think for Leigh too, it felt like when you were a kid, you found that band, and you're like you'd gone to that show, and it was only like 10 people there, and you're like, well, this is mine now, ownership, and to have that kind of ownership over another form of art than music, like film, is rare, I think, and I hope. I know Leigh thinks the same. That it's just it goes.
The Invitation was actually the film I saw that made me put Logan in this. I saw that at the Overlook Film Festival in like 2014, and it was one of those rare movies.
Overlook or Overlooked?
Overlook.
Okay.
It's this horror film festival that's based on The Shining. Like the Overlook is the hotel, and they used to have it at the hotel in Colorado that supposedly inspired Stephen King to write The Shining. So it's like this weird horror film festival that all takes place on the grounds of this hotel, and I knew nothing about the invitation walking in, which is rare these days to go into a movie knowing absolutely nothing. And I loved it so much, and when we were casting this, I just kept thinking of that film because, you know, Logan's character has all this emotional weight and all this guilt in that film, and I thought it was perfect for this.
What was it like? Did you have any fear going from doing so much horror to doing sci-fi? And did you want to retain some of what you've done in horror films with the sci-fi to feel maybe a little more comfortable or at home at times?
Not really. I felt pretty good about it. Like I've written a lot of scripts in other genres, but horror's the main one that's been made, and so that's what I'm known for. So as creatively, I felt fine about the sci-fi stuff. What I did take from horror, I think, which was really instructive, is that sort of run and gun horror attitude, like low budget horror, where you just go for it. Like you have an idea and it's like, quick, throw the camera on the floor, let's shoot it. You know, that I took that into this. Like that was, you were asking about how did you get this movie for that budget? And I think a lot of it was us just being like looking around with no permission. We would like, quick, steal that shot. Or there is a certain attitude on these low-budget horror movies like that, and I think it's really valuable when you're trying to stretch the budget as far as you can.
Well, that attitude makes any film at any budget good.
Yeah.
Though, like I think I was listening to an interview with Paul Thomas Anderson recently, where he was saying that like he still feels like he makes movies that way, where he's the one who's like, no, steal this shot, get this shot now, all the time. So even if you're getting like 5 or 10 or 15 million, you're probably still going to have to do that.
Yeah, maybe it's all the same, but you just have to not be afraid to give the producers a migraine, because nobody remembers the arguments at the premiere. You know, nobody's at the premiere going, you know, you really gave me a headache that day when you got that shot that ended up making the film better. Everybody just, but in the moment, someone like me, I don't want to upset anybody, so it's hard for me to say to people, no, I don't care what you want. We're going to shoot this right now. There were days that were super tense on this film because I was pushing the producers and they were yelling at me like, we need to be done here. We're done. We're way over. We're 2 hours in overtime. And you sort of have to do a little bit of acting. You have to act more upset than you actually are. It's kind of embarrassing. To get what you want on a film set, you literally have to be like, throw the papers down and be like, well, then I just give up.
That's very dangerous to say in front of an actor.
I know, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But you do.
That's true, yes, actor.
You have to stomp your feet a bit and then they'll be like, oh, fine, let's just give him the shot. And then later in editing, everybody's hugging each other and saying, isn't it great? And you're like, yeah, you didn't want me to get that shot. Now you love it. And it's sort of like, you just have to push as hard as you can, you know?
Mm-hmm. What is Blumhouse Tilt? It's like a new, it's like Blumhouse and Neon coming together. And is this the first film on it so far? Or has there been,
This is the first film where Blumhouse has teamed up with Neon.
Right.
And so, yeah, they've been awesome in helping out releasing this. They did I, Tonya and Ingrid Goes West. So they've done
Neon
a lot of...
did, yeah.
Yeah, Neon has a lot of these indie movies, but this is their first time with Blumhouse. Blumhouse Tilt is like a sub-label within Blumhouse. I think what Jason Blum was finding was that all the filmmakers would go and make their movie and then they were just hoping for this brass ring of like a wide theatrical release, 3,000 screens across the US. And it was either that or straight to iTunes. And he was starting to get tired of there being no middle ground. You know, he didn't want to disappoint filmmakers and be like, they've decided not to release it cinematically, so we're going to... He wanted to see what could happen. Like, could you release a film on 1,500 screens, which is still technically a wide release, but you don't have that pressure of like a $30 million advertising campaign. You know, once you've spent that much money on advertising, you have to be a hit, or everyone's dead. People are going to lose their jobs. He kind of wanted to build a sub-label within that would let people experience that theatrical release without, and so. It's been really good for Upgrade because I think the type of movie this is, it's a word-of-mouth movie. You know, it's that movie that you hope has a groundswell around it, and you don't want to have to cover New York and billboards and stuff, and then really hope that people go and see it. So yeah, that's what it is.
I think it's very much going to be not. I mean, I guess word-of-mouth movie can be used as a pejorative. I don't mean it that way. I think a lot of people are going to see this and are going to go, "You have to see this movie." There are so many kind of like water cooler moments at the least that people are going to want to like see this and talk about it.
Yeah, I hope so. I'll call you. I'll hold you to it.
Let's get some questions from our audience right here.
So when writing films like this and the Insidious series, do you keep the budget in mind, or is that something you kind of deal with afterwards?
Definitely keep the budget in mind. Like, for me, I'm always in the back of my mind is like, how much is this going to cost? Especially when with Insidious and with the first Saw movie, I was thinking, well, we won't have any money. So I was really, like the first Saw film was 2 people in one room. That was like custom designed to be something you could make in a garage if you had to, which was the backup plan for us. James Wan and I were thinking, if no one gives us money to make this film, we're going to pay for it ourselves and shoot it in someone's garage. And then Insidious was the same thing. We knew going in that we were only going to have $1 million, and so most of the film takes place in one house. But I don't mind that. I don't mind writing to a budget and keeping it. Same with this. I was like, always keeping it in mind.
Well, having rules gives you rules to break and sort of structure to follow as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's kind of, in a way, I find it freeing to have restrictions when I'm writing. If someone said there's no restrictions, just write anything, that would be kind of stifling. I like the fact that someone says you have to work within this box. It's good.
Next question.
Hi guys. I'm a little bit curious because both of you sort of come from this world of like very tense, sort of dramatic horror films, and you're now upgrading to this, not upgrading, but like
boom
to this like high intensity sort of like action sequency sort of movie. And you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'm curious for each of you what like the differences are and challenge-wise for each one.
Well, I mean, the biggest difference for me is kind of what we touched upon with this film was walking on set. Nowadays, you're used to walking on set to a green screen, and you're used to hearing we'll do it in post. It's all gonna, don't worry, it's gonna look great.
Right.
Whereas in this film, you're in real locations, and they're wheeling in incredible prosthetic, tangible effects that they have to work, or you're fucked.
Is that a fight that you end up having, not a fight, but a conversation, an argument maybe that you end up having with producers as well? Because post is so much more controllable than the prosthetics on set. And I'd imagine the people who are handling the money are like, please just do it digitally. Please, we can do whatever we want digitally.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because on a film of this budget size, digital's also expensive.
Right.
So they're kind of caught in this netherworld of like, damn, we can't afford practical or CG. Why don't you just cut the scene? That's usually the conversation is like, do we really need to see it? And they always try to present it as a positive, like, would it be more powerful if we panned away? And I'm like,
PG-13 that way.
yeah, exactly. And so you end up arguing to just do the scene. And but as Logan said, the practical stuff, there is a tension to it because without spoiling anything for you guys who haven't seen it, it's like, okay, we have 2 prosthetic heads that we have to blow up. We get 2 takes, 2 chances, and then the first one goes wrong and it's like, oh, we have 1 chance. And you just, I mean, it's so funny being on that set because everybody shares in the stakes, like all the gaffer, the catering guy, everybody's around like, is it going to work? And there's that collective cheer. The best moment on these film sets is when it's like 3, 2, 1, and the head blows up perfectly, and then everybody looks at the cinematographer, and it's like everyone's cheering and hugging because it's like, we got it, we did it.
And that's rare now on sets. At least the sets I'm on, and I've been on some big, I've been on some small, but all the way up and down the totem pole, that energy is not on sets anymore. They don't want to take those chances, and this guy did.
Yeah, they'll say like, we'll do the bullet hit in post. Whereas we were like, no, let's load it up with a squib and do it.
Let's feel someone react and have a response and something visceral to brick and mortar exploding in their face and maybe even hitting them in the face. Yeah. And that's awesome. Or it's not when it gets cut and you have to stop everything.
It just looks better to me, practical as well. On the screen, it just looks better.
Is this a world that you feel like you might be building for further films?
Yes.
Oh, there.
You mean this, like sequels you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, you usually when you set up a sci-fi movie, you are building a world that can construct other stories within it, or a continuation of the same story.
Shameless.
It's tough because it's hard enough to get one film that is successful. To get people to go and see a movie is such a mountain to climb that I feel like thinking about a sequel is jinxing the whole process. So I've really pushed any sequel thoughts out of my mind.
But it's hard to imagine, I guess as a viewer, sometimes as soon as you see a sci-fi movie, you're like, oh, they've already thought about sequels for this. Because it almost feels like sci-fi movies aren't made anymore unless they're made to sort of construct a world that can contain multiple movies.
Well, yes, but I think you're talking about a bigger budget here. Like, I do think studio tentpole sci-fi movies, they want to build not even a franchise anymore, a universe. That's the buzzword, which is kind of irritating. But now you need a universe. And everybody's copying Marvel and saying, well, what's happening with our universes? Do we have any? and
Dark Universe? What was
exactly.
That one?
Oh, yeah, the Dark Universe. So they do need to go into their movies thinking about what's the fifth film going to be. But with a movie like this that's independent, not only am I not thinking about sequels and worlds and universes, I'm thinking, how do we get people to care? Still, I mean, this film comes out in a few weeks, and sitting here with you right now, I'm like, I just have no idea. I mean, I'm looking around New York like, haven't seen any posters. I'm like, where are they, Neon? And
Approaching Strangers. Have you heard about this movie, Upgrade?
Yeah, exactly. Or I just try to pretend that I'm talking about it. I'm like, that film looks so good. Can't wait to see it.
Sitting in cafes and bars really loudly.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like a sequel is a great problem to have. If I'm sitting there planning a sequel, it means this film did well enough to warrant one. So yeah, short answer is no. Not thinking about any bigger worlds yet.
Next question, right here.
Well, that was sort of the question I was wanting to ask
Great,
you.
thank you. Next question. Sorry.
No, but is this sort of like you're wanting to open up this universe more? Are you trying to sort of create a body horror version of the Avengers? Because I mean, we saw STEM, and then we literally saw a guy load something into his hand and then shoot it. Mm-hmm. So are you wanting to explore that universe more, and have you sort of thought about like, okay, what else can we do with the human body?
Not yet. With this movie, I just threw everything and the kitchen sink into it. I was like, with these movies that are made independently, you need to shout to be heard, and like, we're living in a media blizzard. It's a different world from when we made the first Saw film. Even then in 2003, it was like TV and movie theaters and video games. But now it's like the content is just, there's just an overload of content, from Netflix to YouTube to gaming to everything.
And like, would the first Saw film land now? In this media blizzard, how would it land right now? Would it be as big of a hit?
How do you stand out? Like the media landscape back then was very different. Like now, I feel like we're in a content bubble. Actually, there's too much content, and the competition for people's eyes and ears is so intense. I have moments with this movie where I'm like, how do we stand a chance? How do we get someone's attention in today's world when you're going up against the Han Solo movie, and in this hashtag world that we live in, you're competing for hashtags, and you're like, I remember the day the Han Solo trailer came out, and it was instantly the #1 hashtag in the world, and I was like, oh, it was kind of a deflating moment. It was a readjustment to reality of like, oh, they're the big kid in town, and they come out the weekend before us, so. It's tough competing for people's attention. Yeah.
But he said body horror, and were you thinking of? I know we had talked about Paul Verhoeven a little bit backstage, but like Verhoeven and Cronenberg and the sort of great violent sci-fi movies of the '80s.
Oh yeah, I mean, I just love those movies. I grew up with those movies. Going to the video store to get an ancient object called a VHS tape, and
the video store. I used to sit on the floor of the video store and try to pick out which movie I was.
Oh, really? Yeah, you would really take your time.
Yeah. Get this kid out of here.
Yeah, I know. There's something that's been lost there's something beautiful about being like, oh yeah, I like that movie. One push of a button and it just appears out of the air. But there was also something great about having to scour for it. And so I love those movies you mentioned. And I thought they were a great model for this film because they were sci-fi on a budget, like you said. And they just had this violent, visceral... There was something fun about them, something a bit go for broke about them, that maybe when you're talking tentpole sci-fi, they need to appeal to more people. So they dilute the craziness of the movie. They can't be that crazy or violent because they need They need it to be a 4-quadrant hit. And so the benefit of making a film like this is you're afforded the opportunity to just go for it.
There's something very, and I just thought of it very much like The Fly in this film, in the sense of how the violence works and the fact that it's about a man discovering his powers. You don't have as much of the deterioration that The Fly has,
yeah.
but it is about a guy discovering his powers and then having these kind of like hyper-violent moments that he can't control.
Yeah, totally. You're saying all the right things. These are all the movies that I love, and they're all the movies that I was looking to with this. I would love to do, maybe not another one in this world, but I would love to do another film like this, where we were going for it a little bit and stretching the budget again, you know?
No, I think I have time for one more. Who's got that right here? Hi.
Hi. You mentioned that as a screenwriter, having a little too much freedom can be problematic. As a director, when you were world building Upgrade from scratch, was it more or less difficult than directing Insidious 3, where it had characters and concepts that were already touched on?
I think it was more difficult in the sense that we were starting with a blank slate. At least with Insidious, I knew the characters in the world, and there was a cushioning around me. It was still stressful and hard, like any movie is. Directing any film is going to be stressful, but it was a soft landing, especially for a first film. Like, it was a good first film to do for me. This would not have been a good first film. This would have killed me. But the world building of it was something, like when you're screenwriting, you just take a guess. I'm not very good with budgets, and I don't want to be good. I stay blissfully ignorant of budgets and all that stuff. So the film I wrote was like the $40 million version, because I was seeing a Chris Nolan movie in my head. Where it gets whittled down is in pre-production. So I give them my screenplay, and they'll say, okay, this car chase scene, you've got 20 cop cars being totaled. We can't do that. How about one cop car? Or they'll say, how about none? And I'll say, how about 3? And they'll say, how about 1? And you do this horse trading, and so that pre-production process is where you discover that, oh, I wrote a $40 million movie. And the painful part is rewriting it down to a $5 million movie. And you have to do it surgically. It's death by 1,000 cuts. You literally have to go through page by page, and one line that took me 10 seconds to write will have to be dissected. It'll say like, off the top of my head, it'll say like, he shoots all 3 of them. And so I'll go, shoots 3, delete. He shoots one of them, delete. He hits one of them. And then that's how you do it, line by line. You kind of whittle it down. So yeah, it's tough to do, but I think it's worth it because of the creative freedom. Like once you get on set, you don't have anyone looking over your shoulder telling you what to do.
Well, you did it. Congratulations. Upgrade is really great. It's such a fun time at the movies, and I really think it's going to be a huge word of mouth hit.
A word of mouth hit?
A word of mouth hit. That's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Or do you just want it to be like a hit opening weekend? Boom.
No, I'll take a word of mouth hit.
I think it's going to do really well. Congratulations. June 1st it opens.
June 1st across the US, and thanks for having us. Thanks for chatting about it.
Thanks for coming on. Thanks for letting me see the movie. I loved it.
Yeah,
Congratulations, guys.
Just
Everyone
see
give
it
them a round of
again.
applause.